Hello and good evening, everybody. Great detectives work in great cities, are inspired by them. The places, the people, London of Sherlock Holmes and to a lesser degree, Hercule Poirot and Lord Peter Wimsey, Los Angeles of Philip Marlowe, New York of Ellery Queen and Nero Wolfe and Inspector Delaney, Paris of Inspector Maigret, Stockholm of the unlikely team of Blomqvist and Salander, but not always. Inspector Avraham lives in the grand city of Holon, Israel, and Detective Chief Van Vetteren strolls the streets of Mardam in the great state of, well, we'll return to that point later. Hello, my name is Oren Nahari, and I'm happy and honored to host today two wonderful writers. Håkan Nesser of Sweden, winner just recently of the Honorary Award of Crime Time Göteborg Book Fair 2020. Congratulations to you. And Dror Mishani of Israel. This talk, The True Detective, is a collaboration between the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Israel and Mishkenot Sha'ananim Cultural Center in Jerusalem. I'd like to start with you, Håkan. 100 years ago, exactly 100 years ago, in 1920, came out a book called The Mysterious Affair at Styles by a young lady named Agatha Christie. And the book will present to the world a famous character, Hercule Poirot, of course, private detective with his fine mustache and gray cells and so much vanity. And this genre that started even before, I grant you this, with Sherlock Holmes and Edgar Allan Poe and others, continues to conquer the world each year in books, in films, in series, in televisions, in Netflix, what have you. Why really? Why is it so successful?
That's a good question, I think. And I've heard the question before. I don't come up with a good answer, I'm afraid. But I mean, if you compare it to, for instance, Dante, which is quite a famous writer, it's people seem to like to read about the Inferno, but not about heaven. So I mean, we have human beings, for one reason or another, we have a deeper interest into the dark nature of human beings than into the light side, sort of. So, but I mean, it's been this situation for 2,000 years. I mean, what is Sophocles, for instance? I mean, the Greek dramas, they always deal with crime and punishment and people behaving badly. So I think it's hidden deep in our nature. But that's as much as I can say. I don't know. It's a very popular genre. It's always been like that. So let's keep on enjoying it.
Yes, but you say we are attracted to the dark side. And yes, it is true. But if we were only attracted to the dark side, we could have read only thrillers. We could have read only, horror movies, horror books and movies, and all gothic, etc. But there is something, perhaps the catharsis, at least in some of the books, that at the end, things will return to their normal.
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's great. Catharsis is one of the, I mean, there are so many good reasons for writing and reading crime. Catharsis is one. And they used to say that the scheme is very simple because it's order, chaos, order. I mean, Agatha Christie, there is a perfect little English village and everybody's fine and then somebody's dead. So it's a lot of chaos. And then towards the end in the library, everything is order again. So that's the rhythm of a crime novel, the classic rhythm of a crime novel. Nowadays they're different. But I mean, of course, there should be some sort of good end, some sort of hope in the last chapter.
And I want to turn to you, Dror, considering this last point that Håkan made. And we'll return, of course, to the present. There is a difference, let's say, between the two great genres, the British and the American. In the British side, we see that there is an order, and then somebody made something to trifle with that order. A murder, usually a murder, in the library of the count or the whatever it is, some sort of a nobleman. And then in the end, after the mystery was solved, order reigns again. The butler will return to the hall and the cook to the dungeon, and everybody will, and of course, the grandees of the land will continue to be the grandees of the land, and the bourgeois will defer to them. In the American private detective, the Philip Marlowes and the same Spades, they know that there is no order. They know that they can only deal with one very small corner and things will return to the usual self. There is no returning to an order. And both of them appeal to us, isn't it?
Yeah, but I think that, you know, in fact, these are two kinds of disorder, you know, Oren, because even if you think about the British, the cozy mystery in the village, you know, it seems that in the end we are back to order, but I'm not sure we're really back to order. Think about what happened during the novel. It's true that we caught the detective, or Poirot caught the detective, caught the murderer, sorry. But other than that, we discovered that everyone in the village is a criminal. You know, he did some theft, or he did some, I don't know, some other misdeed. We discovered that, you know, some of us wanted to commit the murder but didn't have the opportunity or the courage. So in fact, you know, we finished with a village that I'm not sure we want to continue to live in, right? So you know, it's the Americans have their own disorder. The British have, you know, a disorder of a different sort. And I think that, you know, since we're speaking here with Håkan, you know, the European tradition of the detective novel is different than both, I think. And, you know, this is the tradition that I feel close to and that I admire as a reader. And it, you know, I think it also deals with disorder because, you know, when you finish a good European realistic psychological novel like Håkan writes, you know, you're left with the chaos of the human mind, of the human soul, you know, with the darkness that we have inside us. So I'm not sure we're back, you know, we're always back to order.
And I want to continue this point that Dror made, returning to you, Håkan. On the one hand, we are dealing in the crime fiction, in the detective fiction, we are dealing with very universal points of humanity. As you mentioned before, we are dealing with the evil, we are dealing with greed, we are dealing with envy, we are dealing with love, of course, and we're dealing with hate. So on the one hand, it's so universal, the same everywhere, and on the other hand, the detective stories are very, very regional from time to time. We can identify the British tradition, the English tradition to be exact. We can identify the American tradition. We can identify the Scandinavian tradition. There is some sort of a paradox there, isn't it?
I'm not sure. I mean, it's on the one hand, of course, the environment, what country you're in it's important to have a context and where is this story, where is it taken? But on the other hand, the existentialistic questions are the same wherever you are, and also in time. I mean, I can read a book that's 300 years old, written in Brazil, and I can understand the psychology of the people there because we are human. We share the same psychology. So perhaps this is geography, and the cities are not as important as people are trying to make them. I mean, I realized that when I lived in New York for 2 years, and I realized, well, New York. There are so many stories hidden in New York because it's such a marvelous city. Where I was born in Kumla in Sweden, which is a small village town with 10,000 people. And of course, it's easier to find the truth-worthy crime story in New York than in Kumla, of course. I mean, environment is important, but human beings are human beings wherever you put them and whenever they are about to kill somebody or about to solve a crime.
But still, there are some, how shall I put it, national traits. Maybe in the scenery, maybe in the way people talk, maybe in the solitude of the small village, you know, up north in Sweden or Norway. There is something that we can identify as, let's say, the Scandinavian tradition in detective stories. How would you define the Scandinavian tradition?
Well, before I moved, because I've been living abroad for 6-7 years. I've been living in the United States, in New York for 2 years, and I've been living in the United Kingdom, in London and different places in England. I thought that we're so different. There are so many Swedish crime writers, and this is the question you always get. So what is typical about Swedish crime fiction? And the only thing that I find is we write in Swedish. Otherwise, we're very, very different. But I mean, this is the, but when I came to New York, I realized perhaps there is something connecting all the Swedes together. But then I realized that people in the United States, they read Swedish crime fiction for different reasons than people read it in the UK and in Germany, for instance. So, I mean, it's, I mean, we're not Swede. We like to think that we are very famous in the United States. We are not. The only person they know in New York about in Sweden is Ingmar Bergman, the film director. He's very famous. And look at his characters. They are gloomy, they are dark, they are suicidal. I mean, they perfectly fit for a murder story, all of them. So they connect Sweden, oh, that's Ingmar Bergman. And then they see Ingmar Bergman in the crime story, that's fine. This is only in the United States, not in the UK. They think that Henning Mankell wrote about Sweden, and Sweden is going down the drain. Everything was good in the 70s, but now it's going down the drain. That's Henning Mankell's thesis. He's very political, I mean. And they, in England, they like to see Sweden going down the drain. It's not about themselves, it's about Sweden. That used to be a good country, not anymore. They like to read it for that reason. So,
yeah, well, they don't like social democrats, but that's a different reason in England, at least at England, Tory England of the moment. But I want to continue to press this point. Look, you cannot deny, and why should you, that in recent years, let's say at least from Stieg Larsson, and it started even before that with Henning Mankell and others, there is this wave of crime, of detective stories that are enormously successful all around the world, at least in Europe, in Israel. You know, Inspector Van Vetteren and Harry Hule and Elisabeth Salander, and Inspector Welander, and I can continue on and on and on. Mm. Why is it? How did it all happen seemingly all at once? Or perhaps I can be very cynical and say, okay, there is the millennium, go get me the next Stieg Larsson.
Yeah, but I mean, it started in the 90s with Henning Mankell, I mean, and then for some reason, one of the best actors in something happened in 2005-06. One of them is that Kenneth Branagh decided to do Henning Mankell's Wallander on BBC. And I mean, he's a marvelous actor, but I lived in London at the time, and it's ridiculous to see Henning Mankell, and he's trying to speak sort of Swedish, which doesn't work for a Swede, works for him. But that was one thing. And then it was the millennium. Stieg Larsson's first book was out in 2005, and I mean, it hit the world. So, but I mean, my writing and Henning Mankell's are totally different, you see. Sure. We write in Swedish, and he's very political. Stieg Larsson is very political also. So there is a lot of variety in this Nordic crime writing. So, I mean, I cannot really find there is not one thing that's, because we write many books. And if you write such a lot of books, if you write 1,000 crime novels, probably 5 of them are good. If you write only 10, you will find 1 good. So that's Hegel, I think. That's quantity turns into quality, sooner or later.
Yeah, it's true for every genre, we must say. Dror, I'd like to ask you to come to Israel. Is there such a thing as an Israeli tradition of crime fiction? On the one hand, we can see the books of Lizzie Badichi and Inspector Ochayon by Shulamit Lapid and by the late Bat Yagur, Uri Adelman, Yair Lapid tried to write Raymond Chandler only in Hebrew in Tel Aviv with Josh Sherman, and of course Inspector Avram, your marvelous hero. Is there something that connects all of them?
First, let me say, Oren, that I completely, sympathize with what Håkan says. I think one of the traits of Israeli crime fiction is that there's not enough crime fiction. I mean, Håkan said, if you write 1,000 books, 5 of them will be good. If 10 will be written, only 1 will be good. And I think that, what happened in Sweden, if I can, suggest my point of view, and I heard it, one day from a Swedish publisher, is that, because of the success, commercial, but also literary success of writers like Henning Mankell or Stieg Larsson or Håkan, many young writers, very talented writers, started saying, why not? We can try writing crime fiction too. And this brought talent into crime fiction. And, when I look at the literary markets, in France, also in England, and I see great writers, trying to write a detective novel. I just read a beautiful detective novel by John Banville, the Irish writer. He's a great writer. He's probably one day a Nobel Prize winner. And he's sometimes writing a detective novel like Borges did, like Ian McEwan does from time to time. We don't have that. And so this is the first thing. But if I'm looking at the too little that we have, I would say that our crime fiction or our detective fiction is mainly peripheral, in the sense that we take, most Israeli crime writers took their detectives from the peripheries of Israeli society. You mentioned Michael Ochayon by Bat Yagur, Lizzie Badichi by Shulamit Lapid, my detective too. They're Sephardim, so Mizrachim, Oriental Jews, coming a bit from the peripheries or mainstream Israel.
Written by Ashkenazim or semi-Ashkenazim.
No, in my case, but yeah.
Not in your case, but in the other cases.
Yes, exactly. But written by women. Written by women writers who were at the time in the 80s when Shulamit Lapid and Bat Yagur wrote their first novels, a bit peripheral to the mainstream literary scene that was very, very male. And our detectives, I think, also look at sides of Israeli society. I would say they turn their projectors into neighborhoods that mainstream Israeli literature don't always go to. So Lizzie Badichi wrote about Beersheva, a city in the Negev in Israel, and Bat Yagur took her detective to many like neighborhoods of Israeli society. You mentioned Holon, where Avi works, and I was very touched by what Håkan says about his. The city in which he was born. How do you say it? Gumla?
It's Kumla.
Kumla.
Yeah.
So, and you said that, there are only 10,000 people, but I think I heard in what you said is, but in these 10,000 people, you can find very, very interesting stories, behind if you go to the bedrooms, to the salons, if you open the locked doors, you will find stories that are just as moving, just as strong, just as tragic as you'll find in, New York, Paris, Tel Aviv, Jerusalem for us. So this is one trait of Israeli detective. I would maybe add another thing, and that it's, our detectives are not as good as, and I don't mean the books. The books, I don't know. The books, it's for the readers to judge. But the detectives are sometimes more flawed in a way, less successful. Maybe it has to do with, the image that we have in Israel of Israeli policemen, and the fact that we value other organizations like, the Mossad. So, we value our spies, but we don't really value our policemen, although I think we should. And so, so maybe this.
Håkan, I'd like to return there with a saying about Israeli detective books. Dror mentioned Shulamit Lapid and the late Bat Yagur. There is something interesting. In all their books, they talk about, even when they don't try to, but they do, they talk about the old Israel, hegemonic Israel, some would say Ashkenazi Israel, and the second Israel, the Sephardic, lower income, and there are a lot of tensions that only grow in time. Politicians use them, but that's different stories. In all their books, the detectives are Sephardic, and all the criminals, I'm not saying most of them, all of them, from the first to the last, are from the first Israel. Ashkenazi judges, Ashkenazi millionaires, Ashkenazi people from kibbutzim, etc. What
not
is not in your books?
Yes.
You are more modern. You are more modern. I'll return to your point to you in a minute. What can we see from the outside, Håkan, in your books and in others, these tensions in the so-called Swedish or Scandinavian paradise, we can see from time to time what's underneath. We can see from time to time the old grudges going to the Second World War and Swedish and Norwegian Nazis and neo-Nazis. Mm. And there are, of course, the immigrants. But is there a tension that you can read your books and say, okay, yes, it is there?
I mean, for Swedish crime fiction, I can say, yes, there is. But I mean, not for my books, because I'm not I like to read these political books, but, or books or pretending to be social criticism. I mean, and one point of crime fiction is to criticize society. I mean, because it's a very useful genre for doing that. But I'm not that kind of a writer. I'm more, well, into family problems, small problems. But of course, still there is you can't avoid this reflection from what society is like. So, but I'm different from Henning Mankell, from Stieg Larsson in that sense, because I mean, I admire writers who can write that political stuff in a good way, but I couldn't do that. So, but of course.
So yeah. Now we come to the big question. Why did you decide to write about a country that doesn't exist? About the places that don't exist? It is, I mean, it's not obvious to write about a country that have some traits, if I can identify correctly, some Polish traits, some Baltic traits, some Scandinavian traits, some Netherlands traits. Why did you decide to do that? After all, one of the reasons we read detective books and literature at large is to go to other places, to see through the eyes of the writer, you know, through Dostoevsky, to see St. Petersburg, to see Sweden, to see Israel, to see New York.
Yeah, but I mean, the true answer is I can come up with a better answer, but the true answer is that I had written one chapter, could be anywhere in the world. In chapter 2, I needed to place it somewhere in geography. And I said, should this be Stockholm? Should it be London? Should it be a small place in Holland or whatever? And then I realized that I had to do a lot of, to be able to put it in a certain spot, I would have to do a lot of research, and I didn't like that because I had the story. I mean, this could be anywhere, so I didn't want to waste a lot of time doing research. And then I invented this place that is somewhere in Northern Europe, of course, Mardam, very close to. People think it's Holland, but it's not. It's a fictive country. And then, I mean, I only had the idea to write one crime novel, and I didn't realize that this was going to be a series, and I couldn't change it. I couldn't put Van Veteren in Kumla or in New York in the second book. That would be ridiculous. I had to, but I mean, I think it adds something to the story if you don't know where you are. If you, for instance, if you compare it to theater, if you do Shakespeare or old Greeks, normally if you do a Greek drama, you put the characters on stage and you have a black or white background. And then, because you have not a lot of stuff on the scene, you can see the plot, you can see the drama and the characters more clearly against this kind of black or white. And this is the same. If you don't know where you are, the story is more important. The characters are more important than if you are in a city that you're supposed to know well, I think. I mean, that's my excuse anyway.
Okay, but you said that there is a better reason.
No, the good reason is I didn't want to do research.
Oh, okay, that's a perfectly good reason. Yeah, perfectly good reason.
I totally I'm not lazy, you know.
Totally identify. And I want to ask a similar question, Dror. You decided to put your protagonist, Avraham. First of all, I'd like to ask you, why the dual name? Why Avraham and not Avraham Levy, Avraham Rosenkrantz, Avraham Abutbul, whatever you have?
It's a wonderful name. It's a wonderful name. Keep it.
Thank you.
Yeah, it is. It is. You have to be an Israeli to understand how wonderful it is in so many levels. But another question is, why Holon? Even if for commercial reasons to sell the book abroad, Jerusalem would be better, or even Tel Aviv. Why Holon, this city that has no really face, even in a kibbutz, or I don't know, in Jaffa, or in the northern of Israel, you'd say, okay, Haifa have some sort of a character, but Holon is totally grayish. Sorry, I don't want to insult anybody.
No, it's okay. I don't live there anymore, so you can say whatever you want. Listen, I have the true, like Håkan, I have the true answers and the fictitious. I'll start with the true. For Avram, it's very similar to what Håkan says. I wanted, I needed a name. I wanted a name that will be memorable, and I wanted it to be realistic. So I just took a name from a class list that, I found an old class list, and I wanted somebody who's, more or less my age and from Holon. And, I looked for a memorable name, and then, this name of a classmate came to me. But it's true that, maybe unconsciously, my first book is also, about family tragedy and, dealing with a son and a father. And this dual Avraham in the Bible, appears only once when God stops Avraham just a second before he kills his son Isaac. This is where he said, Avraham, don't kill the boy. But this is really something I understood much later, after the book was published, and the reader came and said, I know why you chose Avraham. And I said, how come you know? And he knew, and he was probably right in a way. And about Holon, this is very interesting. Reading Håkan's novels, I thought about exactly what you asked, Oren. When you read a crime novel, you like to travel. You're like traveling. You're traveling to Venice, you're traveling to Paris, you're traveling. And in Håkan's novels, there's something so wonderfully strange that happens, because you gradually understand that you're traveling in a completely fictional city. And this is, it adds to the pleasure, at least to me. But my aim in choosing Holon was almost opposite. I wanted to write, it's the closest I could write to a biography, my detective novels. I could never write an autobiography. I'm not this kind of autofiction kind of writer. But my detective novels are, in a way, an autobiography disguised, very well disguised, I hope. And so it was clear to me, even before I started writing, before I knew I was going to write a detective novel, I knew that I will be writing about Holon. And when I read, I loved detective novels for many, many years. And, the detective writers that I loved and the characters that I loved, at one point I asked myself, why shouldn't they be talking Hebrew and walking in the streets that I know of Holon and, trying to investigate my childhood in a way? And this is how, Holon came to be. And what you said is true about, the limitations of my choice. I was, before Corona, when we were able to travel, I was in a panel in a festival in France. And, the host, he presented the writers, and he said, this writer, is from Spain and he writes about Barcelona, and this writer is from Italy and she writes about Venice, and this guy is from Israel and he writes about, how do you spell this? So, but this was a part of the project, not to write about the spaces or the places the Israeli fiction writes normally about. We write a lot about Jerusalem, and we write a lot about Tel Aviv, and they're so dense with symbolism. And I wanted to write about the places and the people that are less represented in a way. And they're, my friends, my family, people I grew up with. So Holon was an obvious choice.
Okay. And Håkan, I'd like to return to you. And in the meantime, Dror, you will listen very carefully because I'll ask you the same question. Both of you decided, but first Håkan, first of all, that your hero will not be a private detective, will not be a journalist. He will be from the establishment. He'll be a policeman, which is an organization that all around the world is not regarded so very highly. And it will be, it'll be an inspector. He will not be Chief Adam Dalglish. He will be lower middle class, on the verge of poor. Why these two choices? First, Håkan.
Well, I'm not sure, but I mean, in Sweden, we don't have any private detectives. Now I write about Mardam, which is a fictitious, so I could have chosen a private detective, and I've been using private detectives. It's easier in a way because you can let them do anything. So I mean, if you have a police inspector, you have to stay within protocol, sort of. So it makes it a bit more complicated, but I'm not sure. I needed and I like the idea of a good police officer. You know, the only country, they say, I'm not sure whether this is true, the only country where Nordic noir does not work is India, because the idea of a good cop is impossible for an Indian reader in India. I'm not sure whether it's true, but I mean, Swedish books don't sell very well in India. So the idea of having a good cop is totally ridiculous for somebody there. So, but I mean, to me, it was, yeah, I liked it. And also you can use not only him, but a private detective is very lonesome. He has nobody to talk to. If you're a police officer, you can talk to your colleagues at least. I think it makes it a bit easier with the dialogue and the sidekicks, etc.
So yeah. We can relate it to something of the national character, that in Sweden, in Scandinavian countries, there is more faith in the state than the United States, for example. There is more faith in the establishment, in the system. Yes. And he's part of the system. He works within the system.
Mm-hmm. But sometimes he has to work from the outside also. So I mean, there is a system that you believe in the system, you pay your taxes, etc. That's true. But in some cases you have to bend the rules, even if you are a police officer, which Van Meteren does from time to time.
And Dror, the same question. You decided that Abraham will be Pakad, will be in Holon, and we know more or less how much a police officer earns in Israel, and he's not Hercule Poirot in the chateaus and the fortresses and the Downton Abbeys, nor on the other hand Philip Marlowe in a single room with whiskey and chessboard, etc. And he's living very bourgeois life in a very bourgeois city, lower middle class.
Yeah, but this is exactly what you said. I wanted to write about the real crimes that take place in Israel, and I wanted to write about the real people who are, the criminals, the victims, the investigators. My project was very realistic in a way. It still is, and we also don't have a lot of private investigators, and if we do, what they do is like divorce cases. So they just take photographs of adulterers, and that this isn't very interesting. So it was mainly that, and I don't mind, I don't mind the fact that these are middle class or lower middle class detectives, and in fact all the detectives that I loved, from Maigret to Martin Beck, or they're all policemen. I never liked the very cocky private detectives.
And many of the private detectives are detectives at all, also Harry Hula and others, are very flawed people. And your hero is not flawed. He's a human being, as is Inspector Van Veteren, as is perhaps Maigret that you mentioned, and others. They are a semi-rock of stability. You want it to be as realistic as can be without making them into total heroes.
You asking me, Oren? Yeah, yes. I think that, Avi's flawed as a detective. He's not, I didn't want to give him these, very eccentric characteristics that you sometimes give detectives, and they're sometimes working. I'm not saying they're not, but, he's not the middle, the average policeman in Israel is not a drug addict, and he's not an alcoholic, and he's not psychotic. He's, a normal clerk who works for the state and, investigating crimes. And sometimes they're more intelligent and sometimes less. But, so I wanted him to be flawed as a detective. But in fact, I wanted him to be, I wouldn't say
a nice human being.
Yeah. The definition that I came up with recently for him is that, he works in hell, but he tries to believe that paradise is possible. Something like that. I mean, this is what he tries to believe. Yeah.
Håkan, these days, your books, as the books of Dror and others, are adapted to television series, to movies. And once you put the hero in there and he has a face, a specific face, it changes everything. Are you happy with the way your books were adapted to the screen?
Oh, yes, quite so. I mean, I'm not, let's say that I think they made 12 or 13 films from my books. And sometimes you're happy, sometimes you're not that happy. But I mean, I have a good, the Van Wiederen character, Sven Wollter, who recently died, a very good actor, he's very nice. But also, I don't interfere with this. I mean, I don't want to interfere with it. I just leave it and hope that I'm in good hands. But I don't know how to make a film. So there is an American expression. If you're a writer, they want to make a film from your book, there is one rule: grab the money and run. That's what you should do as an author. And then you should leave it and hope that the good guys are making this film. So you can, but I mean, a book is a book, a film is a film. I'm responsible for the book, I'm not responsible for the film. But I enjoyed quite a few of them. Still.
Yeah, there is the famous anecdote of the adaptation of The Big Sleep, when William Faulkner and Howard Hawks sent a telegram to Raymond Chandler and say, who killed the driver?
And he said, I don't know.
I don't know, he said about it. So, and you, Dror, are you happy with the way your books were adapted? I personally adore Maurice, but are you happy with the way they are?
Yeah, I love the Israeli series very much. There was a French film that I liked less so, not because it wasn't a good film, but because I felt it was very different than the DNA of my books. Of course, it's different, and any work of art should be different than, the book that it's adapting. But there was something, radically different in the DNA of the work, so that I liked less. But the Israeli series I like very much, and I think that Maurice, the actor, who is Avram, is a very good choice. I love him very much, and in fact, while writing, I just wrote a new novel with Avram. It was very difficult to get him out of my head now.
Well, Maurice is so very Israeli in the way Avram is, not shining, but one of the great actors we have. So that's very good news. When is the new book coming out?
Next year, hopefully, if bookshops are open again in Israel. So
yeah, that's a different matter. I'd like to ask you, Håkan, you talked about, one of you mentioned John Banville, a great writer of detective books and also espionage, etc. And one of the many things, I should say, that I'm angry about the committee of the Nobel Literature Prize is that they totally neglect what I call genre literature. I mean, detective stories, science fiction, fantasy, espionage, etc., etc. So, Håkan, who would be your, let's say, Nobel laureate for detective fiction?
If you would count John le Carré, this is espionage, I think. But I mean,
espionage, yes.
Espionage, but I mean, he would have it for sure. This is my choice, really, because he's such a. I mean, he's over 90 now, I think, yeah. But he's because he can combine the whole world into the small problems of the personal characters. The small world and the big world always come together in his book. So John le Carré is my choice for the first what would you call it, thriller Nobel Prize. He won't have it.
If we and let's say that we are allowed to allocate the Nobel Literature Prize for detective fiction for also those who passed away, who would be your the one that you nominate, basically the one that you love the most?
Could you say Dostoevsky? Crime and Punishment.
Okay, yeah, well, Dostoevsky is great, but
he's quite a nice crime writer, isn't he?
Yes, he is. And Dror, who would be your choice among the living and among everybody?
I would give a different Nobel, every day to another writer. It's very difficult, but if you let me give if you let me honor the dead too, so I would give a Nobel Prize to Friedrich Dürrenmatt for his detective novels, you know, not for his plays, or to Leonardo Sciascia, and mostly to Patricia Highsmith. Not really a detective writer, but, you know, the best of crime fiction possible.
And both of you, I'm putting aside John le Carré for a minute, but the choice, Håkan, one of the things that people say that detective stories do not do well is delve into the human spirit. Dostoevsky did it marvelously, and John le Carré, but they are primarily not detective writers. I mean, one of the things that we say about Agatha Christie, for example, is that, okay, the stories are marvelous. We return to them every time, but the characters are wafer thin. It is a point with the detective fiction, or we are better than that as time progresses?
We are far better. Oh yeah. I mean, if you go compare to Agatha Christie, I mean, she wrote, the plot is there. I mean, of course, she's a plotty old lady in many ways. But I mean, we are getting very, very close to what you call mainstream literature. I mean, because you have to be psychologically truthworthy and you write realistic literature. So it's, I mean, we have passed that stage. I think it's not. I don't like when people say, "Oh, so you're one of the new Agatha Christies." It's ridiculous because I mean, we have come a long way from that standpoint.
And Dror, do you think that there will come a time, and perhaps there shouldn't come a time, that all will be considered literature, different kinds, but only fiction and non-fiction, and let's say detective stories and horror stories and science fiction and what have you will be among the great, or there will be still, you know, a different place. Oh, you want something just to enjoy for the next flight, go there to the detective fiction.
I love the existence of genres, and you know, I love the fact that you know, detective fiction exists, and it does exist. And you know, I love horror fiction, and you know, I love the fact that you can write or read a genre if you want. But on the other hand, what I would hope is that one day the hierarchy of genres will disappear, and you would know that, you know, you can read amazing detective book, and you can read a very bad detective book, of course, and you can read, you know, awful mainstream literatures. You can read, you know, wonderful mainstream literature. This is the important thing. And also that, you know, we'll blend genres more and more. And I think that, you know, we see that.
It's happening. It's happening.
Yeah,
Let's
exactly.
take J.K. Rowling, the most famous author alive, a lady author, and I think author alive. One way to look at the Harry Potter series is as detective thrillers, at least in the first book and some of the others. We don't know who is trying to murder Harry Potter until the very last pages. We see the tradition of English literature, and of course, she wrote detective stories as well.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that, you know, some of the most beautiful detective books that I've read are books that are doing some kind of, you know, that are mixing genres. And this is, you know, we see that more and more.
I agree. I mean, and also skip the hierarchy. I mean, there are good books and bad books. That's the hierarchy you need, because you can write bad, you can write good books. But the mix is interesting because you when you have when the reader asks himself or herself, is this a crime novel or is it something else? That's a very good question. And I try to, in a way, they ask me as well, is your new book a crime novel? Because well, perhaps it's a crime novel. And if the book dealer asks, should I put it on this shelf for crime literature or should I put it on mainstream? You can buy two books and put one on each shelf. So mix genres and skip the hierarchy. Good idea.
And I'll go one step further. From my point of view, I think one of the best things about, let's say, crime literature and also some of the other of the genres of the hierarchy that you mentioned before is that there is so much assumption on the high literature, and when they are not good, they are very, very bad. And even moderate crime thriller, it's okay, it's a job, and the great ones are great indeed.
Yeah.
Our time is up. Thank you so much for this very interesting meeting. Thank you so much, Mr. Håkan Nesser. Thank you so much, Dror Mishani. Thank for our viewers and our listeners. This talk has been a collaboration between the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Israel and Mishkenot Sha'ananim Cultural Center in Jerusalem. I am Oren Nahari. I had great fun. Thank you all, and be seeing you. And Håkan, we need to see you next time in Israel.
I will be there. You stay there.
Do come.
Delighted. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.